It's time to down tools for a bit. Welcome to the Toolshed, the influential podcast for anyone and everyone involved in the building industry. Here's your host, Mick Hawes.
Hey folks, welcome to the Toolshed Podcast. In this episode, going to be speaking to Martin Preece from Building Environs. He's also got a podcast, the Building Talks podcast. I've been on it. And we had a great discussion. So we're having another one on this podcast. So I'll introduce you to Martin in just a sec. Before we get started, I just want to remind you that if you haven't already, go to the link in the description and do the Builder's Scorecard. What we've found over our journey is most building businesses have one issue. And we might call it the roadblock issue. And when you can identify it and fix it, what we find is a whole raft of other problems disappear. So it's a great way to rapidly progress a lot of the issues and challenges that you have in your building business. It takes about 90 seconds to go through the questionnaire. It will identify what your specific roadblock issue is, and you'll receive a PDF that's tailored to your specific issue and give you some ideas as to how to fix it. So it's a good use of 90 seconds. So as I mentioned, talking to Martin Preece from Building Environs, there he is. Welcome to the podcast, Martin. Where do we find you this fine day? What part of the country are you in?
Well, thanks for the invite and getting me on the show and having a conversation with you again. I'm based down in on the Mornington Peninsula in Victoria. Not such a fine day today. I've got the warm vest on for a reason. It's about 17 degrees. Almost feels like winter.
Really?
So, yeah.
And look at me down in Tasmania in a t-shirt, and if I pan the camera down, shorts. No shoes.
I've got shorts on. Yeah, I definitely got shorts and my Ugg slippers on, which is a measure of how cold my toes are getting.
Right. Well, that's a good look. So you're also, apart from a recruiter with your business and a podcaster, you're also a fashionista, a fashion guru.
Well, I'm going to put you, Traffic, as being the first one that's ever labelled me as that, but I'll definitely be, I'll be quoting you at the dinner table later, or when I go out next and my missus says, "Are you really going out like that?"
Yeah.
Fashion.
I know fashion.
Yeah. I don't need fashion anymore. I've already got the missus and the kids, so
that's right.
What do I need to look smart for?
That's right. That's the old saying. I've caught the train. I don't have to run anymore.
That's right, yeah.
So I want to find out about Building Environs. I want to find out about the Building Talks podcast, its purpose and who you have on it, and encourage people to jump on it and listen to it. But first, what I love to find out is just the backstory, like where did you come from? I detect an accent. So, we can start there.
Yeah.
And just give us the backstory as to how you ended up involved in the building industry and in the recruiting part of it in particular.
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's a question I sometimes ask myself the same question. How did this happen? It's a question I ask myself quite frequently. So, my accent, I was born and my first 10, 12 years were brought up in West Wales. So I'm a proud Welshman. Don't really talk about rugby anymore.
Tom Jones.
Yeah. I do a Tom Jones impression. So Wales and all it's famous, and it is in fact a country as well as a principality. That came up in the conversations. Yeah, so grew up in Wales, moved to north of England when I was 12 with my folks. Went to university, studied sports science in university because I didn't really know what to do with my career and loved sports. Realised that you can study it in a lot of detail. Graduated university, got a first sales job, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was still 21, 22. This was back in sort of the early 2000s. So, didn't have the same kind of social media pressures then as we do now, probably just as well.
Yeah.
And then, so I got my first job in sales, and purely because the advert said, "Are you sports minded?" And I thought, I got a sports degree, so surely this is for me. And turned out that was a sales job. And what they were looking for was kind of competitive people, essentially. Because obviously sales and resilience kind of go hand in hand. So I did that, got my first job in selling insurance, which was, if I remember, critical illness insurance, I think, for self-employed people. Started there, wasn't very good, to be honest. It was a commission-only job, but I could deal with that because I was living at home with my folks, and my folks have always been really encouraging for me to try stuff, but I had that sort of safety net to go into sales. And then, that's right, yeah, a friend of mine's brother was setting up a company that was helping council houses, they're called in the UK. So social housing, people that rent social housing buildings. There was I think it was Thatcher introduced it, but you could basically buy your social housing house or your council home at a significant discount. And I worked as a sales rep for the organisation that would sort the mortgage. And me and a colleague from university, we set up a business, and we had salespeople going door to door in council estates, so pretty deprived areas, pretty dangerous areas in some instances as well, knocking on people's doors and trying to encourage them to buy their probably
living in.
that was falling apart, looked after by the local council, doing a terrible job. And the general reply was, "Why would I buy this shit though?" And it was kind of, well, I don't have an answer for that. So learning to get over that kind of rejection and standing at people's doors in very rough council estates is kind of where I started learning about sort of sales and persuading and influencing people. And then as I was basically, I remember at that point in time, we were doing quite well out of it, actually. We were earning good money. We were 22, 23. I say good money. It was okay money. Again, we didn't have all the overheads that you have when you're this age. I bought a house, but I was renting it with my two mates, so that was free, essentially, for me. But I found that I wasn't really working. I was burning the candle at both ends is probably the way to describe what I was doing at the time. And then I had a friend of a friend who was in recruitment. He looked like he was doing all right for himself. In hindsight, this wasn't a good measure. He was wearing a pinstripe suit and a bright red power tie, which for some reason at that point in time, I was like, I want a piece of that. He was driving around, I don't know, some fancy VW Golf GTI, and I was like, that's me. I want to do that. And so I picked up my first job in recruitment, which happened to be for a company called Catch 22, and it happened to be a facilities management recruitment business. So essentially recruiting for organizations that would maintain and run buildings, commercial buildings, whatever the buildings might be, not strata like you tend to get a lot of in Australia, but more organizations that were running big industrial facilities or big commercial buildings or groups of property portfolios, recruiting for like CBRE, Jones Lang and firms like that for facilities managers, engineers and what have you. And I was going well in that job. I'd kind of reached a level of maturity, I suppose, at 25 that realized I needed to earn a very stable income and sort of started to think about progressing. And then thought I could earn more. And I picked up a job with a company in the UK called Hill McGlynn. So Hill McGlynn in the UK, they're now called Randstad, but Hill McGlynn at the time used to be, I would argue, the best or second best recruitment business in the UK. And they specialized in the built environment. And that's where I learned the kind of so-called craft of recruitment. So, we had a 2-week training, you go away for 2 weeks to sort of start learning the process. And it was the first time I'd been in recruitment for 18 months, 2 years at that time. And going to Hill McGlynn just opened up my eyes to the depth of training, all the elements that get put together. And back then, this is before social media as well. So, how do you gather the name and the number of a foreman on a building site? How do you gather the name and the number of a project manager? How do you get in touch with the general manager or whoever might be running that business when you've got some gatekeeper on reception that's going to stop you from trying to get through to these people? So starting with things like that, how do you gather their number? How do you get in touch with them? What lies do you have to tell to the gatekeeper so they put you through to the general manager? Like, it was a lot of, back then it was a lot of, I'm trying to think of the right word, but you'd play a lot of games basically on the phone to try and get people's phone numbers, and then you could call them. And then it was about how do you engage with them, that first few seconds of the conversation. How do you turn that into a recruitment conversation without saying, hey, Mick, do you want a job? Hey, Mick, do you need any staff? So it's kind of then learning how you articulate yourself in that conversation. And I would have been at Hill McGlynn for about 2.5 years. Loved it. Went quite well. The GFC kicked in 2009. It was tough. That was back when, you remember when, was it, I forget which bank it was, one of the, the big investment organizations in the States started going belly up in sort of early 2009. Bearings, was it? Or the Lehman Brothers or something?
Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and...
Yeah, those sorts of organizations. So I remember thinking this, thinking, oh shit, I'm pretty good at recruitment, but I'm not that good. And the business is starting to make redundancies. And And I remember I lived in Leeds at the time, and I had to drive past the Yorkshire Post, which is a well-known regional newspaper, which I assume still runs. And I remember they were all protesting because they were all being made redundant. And I was thinking, oh bugger, I wonder if we can get a group of recruiters together. So if I get made redundant, as loads of us were in the next sort of 6 months or so, that we can stop ourselves from getting redundant. But I didn't. I got made redundant. I happened to split up with my partner at the time, in fact, the same weekend, and then got paid out. So I got paid, I think, maybe £4,000 or something like that, which was enough for me to then go, oh, do you know what, I'm going to go traveling. It was 2009. Lost my job, didn't have a missus. The house was paying for itself through the guys that were renting it. So I thought, I'll go traveling. And then eventually those travels is what led me to Sydney. So I arrived in Sydney on February the 5th, 2010 for my best mate's 30th birthday. And then I've not looked back. I spent 12 months exactly in Sydney. Then the business I worked for at the time, Constructive Recruitment, asked me to go to Melbourne. We'd recently set up an office in Melbourne that was struggling a little bit. They asked me to go down there and manage it. And I was of the mindset, well, it's a new city, it's a new opportunity. It's going to pay me more money. I don't really intend to be in Australia for too long, but it allowed me to save more money to eventually carry on my travels. Loved Melbourne. As soon as I got here, I was like, oh, this is the best place for me. And experienced so much more, putting a team together, understanding how to coach and mentor people. Dare I say it, trying to inspire people or failing to inspire people is probably the better way to describe those few years. Then they asked me to go to Perth to run the office in Perth, which was a new experience again, because I got to oversee mining and other other built environment sectors. And then didn't really settle in Perth. I mean, my missus, who I'd met in Melbourne, we went to Perth together. We didn't really settle in Perth. Went traveling for another year and then returned to Melbourne in 2016, I think it was. And that's when I was back into construction again. So I'd been recruiting in construction and related sectors from about 2010. But then when I returned in 2016 to Melbourne specifically, that's when I set up exclusively in commercial construction recruitment. So that's where I've been ever since. So that would be, 9 years I've been working in commercial construction. So within that, working for builders, developers, consulting project management firms, a few engineering organisations, some domestic home builders. Most of it's in Melbourne. Most of the work I do is in Victoria. And then also about a year ago, we set up in Southeast Queensland as well, because I recognised Melbourne was going to get a little quiet, which it has, and Southeast Queensland was going to get busy, which it has. And that kind of brought me through. Yeah, and I set up the business Building Environs in 2020, when not the GFC this time, but when the COVID kicked in. And so I set up the business in April 2020, which was a double-edged sword. I was panicking at the time because there wasn't a lot of recruitment to be had, obviously, because no one was hiring in COVID, and construction was all being slowed down, albeit it was 25% or 50% of staff were allowed to stay on site, but it slowed down considerably from recruitment. There was a lot of nervousness in the industry. And that's when I set up the podcast, Building Talks Podcast, because it seemed like a good idea for no other reason, really. I was like, well, there's not much of recruitment to be doing, so I'll have some conversations with some business leaders. And here we are, what are we, 2025? Business is going into, it's nearly closing in on the end of its 5th year. The podcast has got an 80-odd hour-plus episodes. Now people like you are wanting to talk to me. So it's been almost a 20-year journey, Mick, to get to the stage where I'm appearing on the Toolshed Podcast.
Well, it takes time to make a fine wine, as they say.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. And in your story there, I picked up on a couple of things. That one of the things that we have in common, that you were living the dream selling insurance.
Yes, I picked up on that last time we spoke. Yeah, so I
don't know. People get jealous when we talk about that sort of stuff, because people go,
they don't understand.
Wish I could sell insurance. Yeah. Like, it sounds like an absolute dream gig. But
well, I tell you, I wish I could sell insurance as well, mate. That was probably the issue. But I did pick up a few. So that was interesting, because the people I was working with at the time, so this was in the north of England, in around the Yorkshire area, and we covered a region. And it's quite interesting because the guys I were working, so I would have been, 21, 22, 23, something like that. The guys I were working with were all kind of 40s and 50s, and they'd all been guys that worked down the mines. So these were kind of your real working class, really good, salt of the earth types of bloke, very blue collar communicators, but real good characters. And I remember, so we went away. You used to go. I can't remember what they used to call them, but we used to go away for a week selling. So a new patch, and you'd be all excited about that because you wouldn't be looking at the same leads and going to the same people's houses, knocking on their doors and trying to sell them some insurance. But I remember one of the guys, David something, and he was a gun salesman, proper character from Barnsley, like had the accent, had the patter, was just like, you go into a fish and chip shop and he'd be chatting up Gladys behind it. Like he was just like one of these big characters. And it kind of opened my eyes to like that, having a story behind whatever it is you're selling. But also the one thing he said to me was, and like I'd have been 20, as I say, 22. So I was a bit of a cloth-eared idiot, really. And he said, if you want to be successful in any walk of life and sales business, he said, you've got to get rid of the people that pull you back. And he was referring to all the blokes he used to go drinking with and had been drinking his thirsty work down a pit. So he used to, all of his friends, it'd be quite common every night to go to the pub and hit 5-10 pints of beer, have a laugh and a joke, same thing day in, day out. And he said he had to get away from that because they all were kind of naysayers that you could earn good money in sales, but it just wasn't in their mindset. And I remember he telling me that you're going to have to ditch, if you want to be successful, the people that pull you down are going to be some of your closest friends, and they're going to be the naysayers that make you fall into a mindset of something that can't be achieved because they don't do it. And whilst I was pretty rubbish at selling insurance, that has always stuck with me. And I didn't split from my friends because they're all good friends, but it set that sort of stone in my mind that if you just follow your friends and those nearest to you, and you don't take risks and chances and try things that they don't and they won't, you're not really going to achieve anything more than whatever your peers and friends will do, which could be awesome. But if it's not, then you're limiting yourself, really. So that was the one lesson I took from that. The two. One is how to tell a good story. In fact, how to try and tell a good story for me. And don't let other people drag you down. And I've taken that into management as well. Don't let your staff's problems and all their issues, don't let them overburden you with all their problems. Help them with them, but don't let them weigh you down. And that kind of came back from then. So that's a roundabout way of saying, rubbish at selling insurance, but took some learnings from it.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast. We're always trying to bring you information that's going to make your life as a builder much easier. So give us a thumbs up and make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next episode. And it's important to learn from your environment. And, you hear that a lot about, your level of success can be basically calculated by the net worth of the 5 people that you hang around with the most is kind of going to be your net worth, So it's important who you hang around with, what you put in your mind, what you listen to, what you read, all of that sort of stuff, who you hang around, very, very important. And speaking of hanging around people, you've got the Building Talks podcast. Tell me about what you've learned running that podcast, because I know in this podcast, I just have conversations with people. It's like I don't send you out questions or anything. We just press the go button and I find out about you as we're having a conversation. I find it interesting. I have no idea whether the people listening to the podcast find it interesting. I hope they do. But what sort of characters have you met through your podcast? What lessons have you got by speaking to people in your podcast?
Well, it's a good question because, again, I have to think. So it doesn't pay the bills, the podcast, but I do it because I really enjoy it. And I think the reason I really enjoy it is because I enjoy having conversations that are not in recruitment or a sales job. It's often about, trying to close the candidates to get them on the hook, to get them interested in a job, or it's about trying to close the employer to get them on the hook to give you some work. The good thing about the podcast is it's kind of, or what I enjoy about it, it's just conversation, and I don't bolt onto it with the guests. You've got to recruit with me, or there's any benefits from a recruitment perspective. It's just about having an honest conversation. And I've had on the show, and the aim of it is to be, the Building Talks podcast is to just be quite interesting. So I haven't got big ambitions to be the biggest in the world. That'd be nice. I haven't got big ambitions for it to be, make me loads of money, but which would also be nice. The aim is to just be quite interesting, so that if anybody's going to work, driving to work on the tram, train, walking the dog, whatever, they're just listening to some insights from some other people in the built environment that they just find quite interesting. So I've had on construction photographers, people from within HR. I've had engineers on. I've had people talking about modern methods of construction, prefabricated buildings. I've had people on from Ernst & Young to talk about the build to rent sector about, sort of 3 years ago, early in the piece, teaching me about, why that was such a big asset class. I've had people on about data centers. I had the new series is coming out in a few weeks, and I was speaking to a guy that specializes in building services for data centers. I've had, in fact, I've had some inquiries from Metricon. Somebody wants to come on the show to talk about his experiences and his business. So I don't, as long as it's in the built environment, I'll have conversations with anybody, as long as it hopefully is quite interesting. And the measure of quite interesting is if I find it quite interesting, because like yourself, I don't know if the listeners like it. I've never had a complaint, but I assume if they don't like it, they'll bugger off and they won't listen. And if they're inclined to message me to say they don't like it, then that probably says more about them than it does the podcast. But so yeah, I just aim to have quite an interesting conversation. What have I learned from it? It's just these kind of micro learnings that you take from any conversation you have with things. So learning about, why some projects stack up and some projects don't. I've done a lot with developers. I never did sort of a bit of a spin-off series about how to be a property developer, because I wanted to learn the loose fundamentals of how you develop a property. And that kind of opened up my eyes to the amount of risk within any construction project.
How you manage Steve Chandler.
With Steve Chandler, yeah. I don't even know Steve. Steve's a top bloke.
No, I've just got him on my screen at the moment.
Yeah, no, Steve's a good
That's one of your podcast guests.
Yeah, so he came on, and in that I learned about, identifying land, a massive amount of headaches that are involved in developing projects. A lot of the clients I deal with are builders and developers, and builders I do, 60-70% of the work is with builders. So I have a really good understanding of their approach to risk, but I didn't really comprehend the amount of decisions and financial and personal risk developers take on themselves when trying to develop some of these projects. I had managing director of Hickory on, so a very successful commercial builder, George Abraham, just before Christmas. And he was really interesting because he was talking about how you, as a construction professional, how you take feedback and how you take negative feedback. And he was sort of just suggesting that you're going to get good, bad, and negative feedback at any point in time. The trick is to not be emotionally attached to what that feedback is. It's going to be a bit robotic about it, I suppose. And take the feedback, consider it, and apply it. And don't take it as my boss says that I could do better at this and I could do better at that, and it doesn't sound like I'm going to get that salary bump that I was hoping for, and I'm probably not in line for the promotion. I feel like I was, in inverted commas, promised. It's about thinking about the perspective of your manager and understanding why they're telling you something, and that's what you should be trying to achieve. And the reason that's quite interesting to me is because as a recruiter, day to day, I'm speaking to candidates who there's always a reason for why a candidate is speaking to me, or they're open to an opportunity, or they're actively pursuing an opportunity. And it's the key things are project and location. Money is on my opinion, subjectively, is the number one reason people look to move. And then the pathways to promotion. It's not very often that a candidate says, "Oh, they're a rubbish culture." They'll often say, "Oh, I probably could get more money elsewhere." They'll give me the figure that they're on, which is probably a sort of a slightly white lie, because they'll always add on, at least a few grand onto that base salary to start their negotiation, then ask for even more than that. And then I'll ask, "Oh, yeah, why are you looking to leave?" "Oh, manager's not giving me opportunities, or I was promised this promotion in 12 months, hasn't eventuated, and therefore I want to leave here because they've lied to me." And I hear that as a recruiter, and I think, okay, opportunity for me to sort of dig into that, erode that, and sort of turn that into a reason why I can place this person, because they seem quite good. But in the back of my mind, I'm now thinking from podcast conversations, maybe you didn't get promoted because you're not performing as well as you ought to be doing. What did your manager say about what your KPIs are? What do you have to achieve? And it's very infrequently, in fact, almost not at all, that a candidate will say, "Mick, my boss said to me that I need to work on my letting gains," or whatever it might be within the task. They never say that, and what they're going to do to fix it. they just say, "Oh, he's not going to give me what he promised." And it's like, well, if more people listen to the feedback from their employers or their managers, it is in their interest to make you better at your job, and it is in their interest for you to be successful, because if you're successful, your manager's successful because their team's being more successful, and therefore they're performing better. Um, but yeah, there's that lack of awareness, I suppose, that comes from the feedback people are given. Everybody always takes oh, well, if that's the feedback, then then they're rubbish, and this company's not for me. Where actually, I think, take the feedback on board. Some of it's valid, some of it's not, but at least work with what is valid and improve yourself that way and master the job, and then move. Albeit, I'm happy to move them straight away, but it is something that, from what George was saying, it's made me think more about. If you're not getting the feedback from your bosses, or you're not hearing it, then that's probably on you as a candidate or an employee.
Yeah. From a recruitment point of view, so we're talking about construction. The majority of people listening to this are in the residential construction area. What are some of the common errors, misconceptions, mistakes that are made from a recruitment point of view with the residential builder?
Well, in the residential space, so it's slightly different to the commercial construction space. And I've got quite a handful of clients. I used to do a lot in the residential space, but over the last few years, it's been so financially opportunistic to be more in commercial. I've focused on that, but it's harder in the residential space to pay above the market rate. It doesn't quite stack up in the same way as it does in the commercial setting. So the first issue I see with most employers within the domestic residential setting is that there's no point trying to outbid or pay that extra $5,000 or that extra $2,000 or $3,000 for. It helps, but that's not the reason that you should be looking to hire somebody, because you can pay them $3,000 or $4,000 more. Because essentially, you're just hiring somebody that's just chasing the dollar, which they are. But what you really want to be selling is the opportunity for growth and progression. Because within that opportunity for growth and progression, the assumption would be, well, if I grow and I get promoted and I do a better job, I'm going to earn more because I'm better. So I think that the area that a lot of sort of domestic home builders miss out on when they're recruiting is they don't really think about what we're providing this site supervisor, this contract administrator, project manager, client services person. They're not really thinking about what they're giving that person outside of money. They kind of say, oh, we're building, I don't know, 25 super luxury homes in southeast Melbourne. Right, that's great. And we're paying, $5,000 over the odds. Okay, that's great too. But why would somebody want to join your business? What are they actually going to get out of this other than that extra bit of cash? What's attracting them? So I find that in the domestic residential space, the organizations are really, really focused on selling the product or the home, but they don't think about selling the career.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of builders that do that quite well. But that's what goes hand in hand. If you can't offer significantly more money for a significantly better talent, then you're going to have to come up with some other solutions. Part of those solutions are, how do I position the business that makes it more attractive? How do I sell the aspirations of the business owner? I work with a townhouse builder called Level 10. You won't mind me mentioning them because they're a good outfit. And I do all of their recruitment for them. And they've gone through an evolution over the last, I think they're about 10 years old now. Over the last sort of 6 or 7 years, I've done all the recruitment. And it started off being, we need a bum on a seat. We need somebody quick. We need this, that, and the other. And then slowly, as it's kind of evolved and we've worked together, is they let me know well in advance of what they might need and why they might need it. So I'm not being asked to find somebody within like a 3-week window before the 20 townhouses kick off. I've known for a few months. And so I've got time to kind of filter. I was speaking to Andrew, the general manager, a few weeks ago, saying we're potentially going to need a contract administrator in about 12 to 16 weeks. It's perfect. So I can have my finger on the pulse of candidates in that space. And I could say to Andrew next week, I found what I think is a good guy or a good girl, or when I say guy, I just mean male and female, but I found a good candidate, see them now or see them in a few. So it just allows me to better cover the market. Because the issue with recruitment is, there's the one way that most employers do is they advertise on, we'll say Seek for the purposes of this conversation. So they'll advertise on Seek. The advert will only be $500, which seems fine. But it's only advertised for 30 days. So there's a couple of things that you rely on in that process. Okay, I'm advertising the job. I'm going to get loads and loads of applications, and you will, from a variety of sources, a lot of them from overseas. A lot of them will need sponsorship. A lot of them won't work in the space. And there'll probably be one or two people in there that are quite good candidates and worth considering. The issue's going to be that the way that job boards work is that every recruiter in Melbourne will have seen that or the geographical area, that person has updated their details on their Seek board. So that alert goes out to every recruiter. Every recruiter is then speaking to those attractive looking candidates on paper. And all of a sudden, even though they've applied for your job, there's 10 other organizations also looking at those candidates. So it's kind of, and then you've got to compete about, well, why is my company better than those? So there's two candidates from one job advert. They're all being hit up by 5 to 10 companies, including the job they've applied for. You've immediately decreased the likelihood of you successfully hiring that person, that sort of 1 in 10, 1 in 5 people. So you have to position your business so that it is the most attractive business in the space. Now, if your business is, a grade A kind of well-known, great reputation, known to be brilliant, and you're competing against that grade A company, and you're like a grade C company, you've still got a way to evolve, to develop, to get to that, you're not going to be able to get that person realistically, because they're going to be more attractive to that top tier organization. But what you've got to do is, in the space that you're in, if you look around your competitors, those are the people that, on the face of it, your business needs to be more attractive to them, more attractive from a career perspective, not just from, company A builds better homes than company B. So how do you position the business? And that's the sort of the mindset that I think in the domestic residential space, that employers aren't thinking about, well, what are we providing this candidate by way of their career and opportunity with us? They're saying this candidate needs to have 5 years building super luxury homes over $2 million. They need to have a good black book of subcontractors in this area, which I always think, well, why do you need subbies in that area if you've got a good relationship with your subbies? That always makes me think, well, something's amiss there. But again, I don't sort of question it. So it's, how do you position the business that's going to make a site supervisor, let's say you're after a site supervisor, be more attractive to your role than your competition? And that can be as much as you've got a good recruitment process. So you respond quickly, the feedback's detailed, the interview is good. And by interview good, I don't mean, it doesn't have to be a podcast kind of conversation, but it needs to be that the candidate, the site supervisor in this example, feels comfortable and confident that the construction manager or whomever they're sat in front of has got their back, that they can work with them, that they go for it. Like, a lot of construction is about mateship and feeling confident that the people you're working with have kind of got your back and they know how to build, and they do it the right way. But if you don't have an interview, if the interview process is with some bloke in HR, then that, that's great. But some bloke in HR isn't going to solve your problem when your plumbing contractors or whoever, the waterproofing contractor, has screwed it up and has got it totally wrong, because the HR guy hasn't got a clue himself. So you need to be speaking to the people. So your recruitment process needs to be attractive. It needs to feel like, if I'm walking through that door, okay, this bloke's good. Yeah, no, I'm not sure about the company, but I've raised these issues. I've heard that they don't pay subbies, or whatever the issue might be. I've spoken to the construction manager, and he's been very honest, very genuine, and, dare I say it these days, authentic with how they're going to solve these problems. I'll buy into that, because every builder's got problems. They've highlighted and told me what theirs are, but they've also highlighted and told me how they're going to resolve those and what part I will play in that. So the conversation within that interview process is about solutions and resolving problems and growing and learning as a team and together, and everybody's in it as a team. And these are the aspirations of the business. So positioning your business to be attractive isn't about beating the very best builder in the home building space. It's about beating your competitors, or attracting their best talent from their businesses into your business. And that's kind of the approach I always think that the domestic builders need to think about, is positioning the business to be attractive, to get the best talent, and then you can kind of grow as a business from there.
Yeah. You're getting a bit dehydrated?
I am. I'm always dehydrated. Yeah. I talk too much. That's my problem.
You mentioned Southeast Queensland and Victoria. Are they, like, with your business, are you really only recruiting for people in those geographical spaces? Are you able to help people in other states? What's the story?
Well, it depends on the role. So you have to be my position is that in recruitment, you've got to be an inch wide and a mile deep to be successful. So you have to know your network, you have to know the roles. So in Southeast Queensland, for example, in fact, I did some recruitment for Steve Chandler before Christmas. So I'll do roles in different states, but it's got to be a role that I'm comfortable that I'm going to be able to fill. And my measure of that is, okay, so how fillable is the job in itself? And then how accessible for me as a recruiter is the talent for that role? So if it's so for example, if it was in Hobart, for example, so if they were looking for a site supervisor in Hobart, well, I probably don't have a network of, like, I don't have a database of like 150 or every site supervisor in Hobart that bills a certain type of properties. But if it's like a senior role that you can headhunt for it, and it's got a very logical recruitment process, and there's enough data on LinkedIn or on my database or accessible online, and as a recruiter now, I pay for different, I don't even know what they're called, bots or something that kind of go off to the internet and find me data, which I can then call and engage with. So as long as I can get access to the data, then I can access people, and then I can have the conversation. So yeah, the focus is on Southeast Queensland, or primarily Victoria, but Southeast Queensland secondary to that. But if, let's say, a senior enough role popped up in Sydney or Hobart or Adelaide, as long as I'm confident I can fill it because it's like a common role that I know and understand, then I'll have a run at it. But I'll give the employer the opportunity to say, listen, this isn't my core space. But like I did with Steve Chandler, it was a development manager role, a development/project manager role. So I can access people relatively easily from that. So it's just about applying the craft of recruitment to a different set of people, but it's still the same job, different location. But yeah, it's easier if somebody says, I'm looking for a contract administrator in Melbourne or Southeast Queensland, than it would be if they said they're looking for a foreman in Sydney, where foremen are not online. Their data is not accessible online. So I won't be able to find them very easy. And I'm not going to spend 4 weeks ringing every job site in Sydney trying to pretend to the gatekeeper that I'm
no commitment. Like that's that's no good. You need to have more commitment. Be getting on the phone and ringing. Mate, I'm just looking at the clock. Fascinating conversation. I think recruiting is so important. The quality of the people on your team can make or break a business, and I often chuckle to myself when I hear people sort of complaining about the performance of a team member. But you hired them.
Yeah, that's right. Just one final thing on that. So in residential recruitment or domestic, I always find it odd that employers are, I don't know how much like a new, Toyota Hilux or a Ford Ranger costs these days, but I've had clients in that space say, "Oh, I don't want to spend that kind of money on hiring somebody." I was like, "How much do you just spend on your 60 grand?" And I know there's tax benefits to that. I was like, "So that you've just bought a car for 60, 70 grand over the however long, and yeah, there's some tax, but it's going down in value. It's worth nothing to you other than a car with your brand on, and yet you got something that's a third of the price. That's a human that's supposed to be appreciating in value." And if you get the right hiring process, you've got an asset in the business that is going to be worth more next year and the year after. So why are you worried about the recruitment fee? Because that's going to make you money. Yeah. But yeah, it's just a psychological thing around, people are happy to buy a ute, less happy to buy a high performer.
And there are tax benefits in having an employee as well. So
yeah. Well, there's also some profit benefits as well.
Yeah, they've got imagination, they've got a brain, they can contribute. It's all good stuff. So it's buildingenvirons.com.au. Also, if you want to jump on and have a listen to the Building Talks podcast, you can get that through that website, but you can also go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all of the normal places where you'll find a podcast, and search for the Building Talks podcast. And if you want to speak to Martin about recruiting, you know where to find him. So we'll have all of the links to everything in the description. So reach out. Thank you, mate, for being on the podcast. It was great to catch up again.
You too. Excuse me, and sorry for those technical issues at the start there, but we got there in the end.
That's all right. We know that you've been ill, and that's why I look red and you look yellow in the video, because I'm feeling.
We do something in post-production about editing my sort of a bit thinner, a few less grey hairs, a bit bigger hair.
We'll bang some filters on it. Don't worry about it. It will make you look like Tom Cruise.
Awesome.
Thanks, folks.
Tom Jones.
So that's it for you. Tom Jones. That's it for this episode of the Toolshed Podcast. As I said, all of the links will be in the description. Jump on buildingenvirons.com.au and you can reach out, have a chat with Martin, and also put the Building Talks podcast on your favourites and listen to that while you're driving around. And just one quick reminder before we get out of here, if you haven't done the Builder Scorecard, there's a link in the description. Jump on there. It takes 90 seconds. You will be given your score and focused on the issue that if you fix that particular issue, you'll find a whole raft of other issues will disappear and you'll get a PDF delivered to your inbox specifically around the issue that you need to fix with some guidance on it. So it's a good investment of 90 seconds. Jump in and do the Builder Scorecard. So that's it for this episode of the Toolshed Podcast. We will be back with another episode of the Toolshed Podcast before you know it. But my name is Mick Hawes. I'm from Builders Business Black Belt, and that is all. I am out. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the Toolshed. If this podcast struck a chord with you, make sure you spread the word by sharing it with your mates in the building industry. We love your help to make the building industry better for everyone involved.